we memorialize for folks who can't join us tonight. And let me welcome everyone to our community Zoom on the DC bottle bill. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Lisa Gore. She and I are co-hosting this conversation with our special guest, Stephanie Miller, and colleagues, whom she'll introduce here momentarily. Also, we're joined tonight by two other commissioners. Liz Nagy is with us, and Carol Grunwald is with us. So Liz and Carol, welcome and thank you for joining, and thank all the community members who are on the call. The occasion for this is that the ANC 34G is going to be looking at the bottle bill. We're going to have Stephanie with us tomorrow, in fact, for a bit of our meeting tomorrow night. But we wanted in advance of that, Lisa and I did, to have a longer session to allow Stephanie to walk us through what the bottle bill is about and to give our community members an opportunity to ask questions, to go more in depth. So that's what we're doing tonight. And I'll introduce Stephanie in 1 second. Lisa, let me go to you since you're co-hosting this and let you have a chance to offer your own words of welcome.
I think you said it perfectly, Bruce.
Anything you'd like to say? We're getting started.
Just welcome to the community. Thank you, Bruce, for organizing this and tagging me on as co-host. Me and Bruce kind of stepped into this at the same time. I had a couple connections that also asked me to bring this up within ANC 34G, and Bruce was already working on it. So we joined forces to kind of introduce the concept. Hopefully at some point get the ANC to enter into a resolution, but I'm glad we're having the broader community conversation. Stephanie, I shared with you some questions that community members in my neighborhood had from the Hawthorne WhatsApp chat. So I'm glad I plugged that in there and they were able to provide some feedback. So the broader community conversations are great because it gives people an opportunity to kind of delve into the subject a lot more. So thank you for coming tonight, delving into this topic with us. And thank you for all the community members for sharing your Sunday night with us. Look forward to the conversation.
Great, Lisa. Thank you. So Stephanie is known to many of us in the community since she is a fellow Chevy Chase resident and a good friend. She's been in a conversation that I held. I was mentioning before we pressed the record button on around Earth Day last year that focused on the topic of Earth Day, which was planet versus plastic. So we've had an ongoing conversation in our community about plastics writ large. We spent a lot of time talking about artificial turf, which is plastic, but that isn't the only thing we're concerned about. We're concerned about plastic microplastics, and Stephanie was gracious enough to come and be part of that conversation last year with Zero Waste DC, the actual government agency. John Johnson, who heads that, he and Stephanie joined for that conversation, which we've recorded and is up at our ANC website on YouTube. But I want to introduce again Stephanie, and thank you, Stephanie, for joining us tonight. She is speaking tonight on behalf of 3RC for DC, which is Return, Refund, and Recycle Coalition for DC. And you have a couple colleagues, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind introducing Susan and Chris, and then we'll let you get started with your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Bruce, and it's great to be here with you this evening. So yes, let me introduce Susan Schorr, who is actually in your ANC, I believe, and is the co-lead of the coalition for the bottle bill. And Chris Powell is joining as well to help me with the Q&A. I will give a brief briefing and really would like to spend the time answering your questions. As you said, Commissioner Gore, I've been to the other kind of ANC meetings that are boom, boom, boom. There's a whole agenda, and it's really nice to be able to actually have the fuller conversation and answer all the questions. So if it's okay, I'll pull up a slide deck, a short slide deck.
Absolutely. I'll let you share your screen.
Oh, send request.
There you go.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Momentarily, we will. There we are.
Okay, great. So I am in Ward 4 I am a Chevy Chase resident. I am a volunteer with the DC chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm speaking to you this evening on behalf of the coalition. As Bruce said, the 3RC Coalition, I think we're going to sort of change our name to the Bottle Bill Coalition. It's a little bit of a mouthful. The Return, Refund, Recycle Coalition for DC. We are made up of 25 organizations. And we've been pushing for a couple of years, advocating for a strong and equitable bottle bill in DC. And so I'll present, as I said, fairly briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions. Just a quick timeline on where we are. Since I began speaking with Bruce about this, a few things have changed. On January 15th, Councilmember Nadeau introduced the bottle bill together with 10 other co-introducers. That means out of the council of 13, 11 have expressed or are in support of the bottle bill. And what's happened since then is that the bill has been referred to the Business and Economic Development Committee. They have until July 14th with it and for hearings, and then it goes to the Committee on Transportation and Environment. And then the current language that's in the bill foresees that January 2028 is when the bill would come into effect. You've got here, and I think you'll all get afterwards this slide presentation, so you'll have all these links to the actual bill language if you want to dive into that, the frequently asked questions, Councilmember Nadeau's page that has a lot of great information on it as well. Okay, so this is the problem. This is the problem that we're trying to address. I think any of you have seen these kind of images. Ward 8 on the left, Ward 4 on the right. I was actually going to go out today and take some pictures in Ward 3, but I ran out of time. But we've all seen this, whether it's along the river or our parks. We see litter all over the place, and it is in the form almost exclusively of beverage containers. And it disproportionately affects neighborhoods, wards 5, 7, and 8 along the Anacostia River. That's where a lot of the cleanups have taken place. You may be aware that EPA has declared the Anacostia River to be impaired by trash because of the large amount of litter that is along the banks and in the river itself. We actually have the figures that plastic bottles, even though they're so light, account for 60% of all the trash that's floating in the Anacostia and along the banks. So it's a really terrible problem, and one that we want to try to address with this bottle bill. We think DC can. This is kind of where it all started. The coalition members, many of them do trash cleanups, and many of us have done brand audits. And this just means you take what you clean up and you put it into piles and you figure out what kinds of trash we're looking at. And the brand piece is what are these brands associated with these empty containers? And what we see is plastic water bottles, soda bottles, juice, beer, sports drink. It's just a lot of bottles. And so what we decided to do, I don't know how many of these cleanups were done before the coalition decided this is something we could do something about. So let's push for a bottle bill. DC used to have a bottle bill. We'll come back to that in a second. The coalition members, we have brought in experts on plastic bottle bills. We'll go into this in a moment, but there are 10 states in the US that have bottle bills. And we have also talked with thousands of residents to ask them what their concerns are, what they would want to see in a bottle bill. A lot of them said they really wanted to make sure that if they could get the deposits back, they wanted to get them back with ease. They didn't want to have to travel far to get them. So having accessibility in every single ward was really important to them. We also heard them say that the quality of water if they have lead pipes in particular that haven't been replaced is an issue. The safety of their tap water is an issue. And that was driving a lot of the plastic, the water in plastic bottles. So what would a bottle bill do and how would it work? So what's being proposed in the current language is that bottle bills would set a 10-cent deposit that would be immediately returned once the bottle is returned. We're talking about all beverages in plastic, glass, or aluminum containers. There are some exceptions. I can go through them, but by and large, this captures everything. It doesn't capture dairy. It doesn't capture Pedialyte and medical supplements, but it captures by and large what we see in the rivers, for example, and in the parks. That incentive, that 10-cent incentive, it's not a tax, it's a deposit, it gets returned, but that incentive has been huge in the states that have the bottle bills in supporting people actually returning them so that they can be recycled. And what we expect from the bill, what we know from research, is that we could expect an 85% recycling rate. Sorry, we can expect much larger recycling rates, but what we know is that there's always going to be some percentage of deposits that go unclaimed. And those could be used to address some of the problems I just mentioned before. They could be used to fund lead filters for district residents that have lead service lines. They could be used to put water bottle refill stations in various wards. And this is language that is in the bottle bill today. So how does it actually work? There are a few ways in which the bottles can be brought for the deposit to be returned. One way is what's called a reverse vending machine. And you have an example sort of that on the left. This is actually a machine that's at Nat Stadium where you could put the bottles in, but you don't get money back. The ones we're talking about are machines where you could actually get the money back, or you get a piece of paper that you can bring to the counter to get your money back. There's also foreseen in the current bill language bag drops where people can bring many bottles at a time in bags, and then bulk processing programs that could be tied to accounts that would get refunded when the bottles come in. I don't think that beeping is me, but I'm sorry if it is.
I'm trying to address it. Thank you.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure I didn't touch anything. I wanted to just briefly touch on the fact that one thing we've seen in a lot of other states, which can be very exciting, and it's come up in other ANCs and in discussions with residents, is this bottle deposit money can be used for fundraisers, for schools, for faith-based organizations. In Oregon, they even have a college education savings account where you can use your bottle refund to put into the college savings account. So these are ideas, these are things that could come along with the once the bottle bill is implemented. This is in big letters because it's really important. This is why we, the coalition, are pushing for a bottle bill. I think this is what has convinced the council members. It's very compelling. Bottle bills cut litter dramatically. What we've seen in the states that have 10-cent deposits, there are some states that have 5-cent deposits, 10 cents seems to be the sweet spot, is that you get that incentive in place and your litter gets cut down dramatically to the effect of 69 to 84%, depending on the state. I want to briefly name the states because someone will always ask, what are the states? I memorized this the other day. I don't know that I have it memorized, but I'm going to cheat and look at the bottom. These are the states that have bottle bills today: California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Iowa, Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan, New York, Oregon, and Vermont. And what's interesting, I think this is the most fascinating statistic of all I've seen on this, is that these 10 states account for only about a quarter of the US population, but they account for over 50% of the beverage bottles that get recycled. So that just tells you how effective they are at feeding the bottles into the system where they belong, where they could be reused. We can talk about that, as that's kind of one of the questions I think we have, but definitely recycling rates go way up in these states. The expectation in DC is that we will go from a recycling rate of 25% of beverage containers being recycled to over 75%. And this is what, if you break it down a little bit differently, this is what this looks like. So if you look at the bottle picture on the right, that's today, DC without a bottle bill. 25% of the beverage containers that we have get recycled. The other 75% do not. What happens to them? They get trashed. And what does that mean? They end up in the environment, or they end up in landfills, or they end up in incinerators. So with the bottle bill, which is the image of the bottle to the left of that one on the right, is what we expect. 85% of beverage containers should be recycled. This will promote environmental justice. We talked about a lot of the container litter is in wards 5, 7, and 8 along the Anacostia. It will be good for the climate because obviously if we're recycling more, especially of the aluminum and glass, that's saving energy and that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It will also create jobs, green jobs. We know from the other states, there's a segment of the population that will make, they're called canners, and they will make a point of picking up the litter that is still left behind and returning it because of the incentive to get cash. We also know that because there will be more in the waste management system to manage, because now you're shifting all that trash into the recycling streams, it means that there will be more for haulers to do, collection and transportation and hauling and managing of this additional waste. Okay, so we do get asked quite a bit, will the bottle deposit laws affect retail prices? And the research that is out there, and some very good research has been done on this, is that that's just not what we're seeing. There is the beverage companies that will be responsible for the price, paying for this, supporting the retailers to be able to do this collection. Their marginal additional cost in the states that have the 10 bottle bills, we are not seeing that that is being passed on to customers. You see this this quote here by this study that was done in Massachusetts, one of the bottle bill states. Supermarkets with regional operations have remarkably consistent beverage pricing for both deposit and non-deposit beverages across, I can't see states, I think, regardless of whether the state has a bottle deposit law. And this is actually some of us, I think some of us on this call in this picture. This is to say what we are doing as a coalition is outreach. When Councilmember Nadeau was discussing this bottle bill with the coalition, she asked that we provide support in giving briefings to residents and being out there to answer questions that you have, which is why we're here with you this evening. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. These are it's actually up to 12 now, ANCs that have resolutions that in support of a bottle bill. Some of these were resolutions that came in advance of the introduction on January 15th of the bottle bill, and a few have come after as well. And yes, so what's interesting is we have talked to residents. Some of you may have been in DC if you've been around a long time and remember that we had a deposit return program before. A lot of those programs in a lot of states went away when plastic really came into being a very dominant form of material for beverages. because prior to that, it was very important to beverage companies to collect those glass bottles, for example, Coke bottles. They were a business asset for those beverage companies. They would reuse them, they would clean them and refill them. Once plastic came along, it was cheaper and much easier for the beverage companies to pass on the burden of the collection and trash management to consumers and to municipalities. So then we ended up with this one-way system where you had the bottles, beverage containers no longer being managed by the beverage companies. What we want to see is a return to that system of reusability and recyclability that we don't have today. There's a lot of resources on this. The Container Recycling Institute is the place to go for good data. We also have a couple of interviews, links to interviews here with DC residents. There's more, if you Google district bottle bill, on January 16th, there were a whole slew of articles and press because of the introduction the day before. So, and I think, Bruce, you sent around the Washington Post article on that, but there are probably about 10 other articles I can forward to if you'd like. I will, you have the contact information here for Susan, who's on this call, and Chris Weiss. They are the co-leads for our coalition. Susan is also the head of the DC chapter Sierra Club Zero Waste Committee that I am a part of. I want to just end by saying, just summarizing, a bottle bill would drastically reduce pollution in the district, in all wards of the district. It would drastically increase recycling rates. It would be good for the environment. It would be good for climate change mitigation. It would be good in terms of environmental justice, and it will create green jobs. So we think there are not too many downsides to a bottle bill, and we're very strong proponents of having DC move forward with its bottle bill. Okay, I will stop there and I will stop sharing.
Great, Stephanie. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. I appreciate it. There already are a couple of questions in the chat. I have an overarching question I'd like to lead with, and I'll just note that we're right on time at 7 o'clock. So we have a half an hour for a Q&A. Anyone who'd like to ask a question, kindly just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Thank you, Carol. I see you. My opening question is this, Stephanie and Susan and Chris. In our community, of course, we're recycling. And while appreciating everything you've just said, Stephanie, about the litter that happens in other parts of DC, it might be a natural question for some in our community. Well, gosh, I'm already recycling all of my plastic bottles. I put them in the blue can along with aluminum cans and glass bottles. So A, you've answered it, but anticipating it, why do we need it? But B, let me just drill down a little bit. What would be the impact on the current recycling program with a bottle bill?
So if we start with the environmental justice piece, we talked about wards 5, 7, and 8 are disproportionately affected by the
who's this woman, you know?
Oh, sorry.
So yourselves, if you happen to be coming in, or I'll do that. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, so as you know from the artificial turf conversation, plastic in Anacostia doesn't stay in Anacostia. We are breathing plastic, drinking plastic, and you don't have to live next to the Anacostia River to be affected by the plastic in our world, in our district, in our area. So that's one thing. Absolutely, if you have residential recycling, you can continue to put your beverage containers in that recycle bin. You would miss out on the opportunity if you're buying your beverages in DC from getting the deposit back. But the current recycling system would still work. You would just be out your 10-cent deposit. Yeah, so what we imagine though is a lot of the beverage container, um, uh, most of that volume will probably be redirected away from the the bins that we use now. But it doesn't mean you can't use the bins that you use now. If that's convenient for you and you don't care about the 10 cents, that's fine.
Right.
I want to see if Susan or Chris wants to add anything to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to
Oh.
add to that. Thank you very much. And thanks, Stephanie. That was a great presentation. And thank you, Bruce and Lisa, for having us here tonight. So it's gonna, so one of the big differences is curbside recycling. Who pays for it? The district government pays for it, which means we as taxpayers are paying for it. In this program, it is the beverage companies that are going to be paying for the collection and recycling of these materials. As Stephanie explained, they made packaging decisions decades ago, which they knew were going to create a huge litter problem. But they went with it because it was cheaper for them. And so this is also a framework that will make them responsible, financially responsible for the packaging choices that they have made. And it's going to save the district government, it'll save the Department of Public Works budget money that it won't have to pay to haul all of those materials to the material recovery facility, which is, miles and miles and miles away from the district where it is sorted. So it's gonna save us money. But as Stephanie said, if people want to use curbside recycling, they can. But it would be much more efficient to get your deposit back. Or, we've heard from people who live in apartment buildings, it's so convenient for me now. I have a chute that I can put things down. But perhaps the janitor in that building would be motivated, incentivized to bring those bottles back and get the deposit. And it is a way of being in solidarity with people around you who have less means than you might have.
And
And I would just
Chris,
like
yeah.
to add, thank you, Stephanie and Bruce. The first part of the question, we've talked a lot about the high percentage of bottles in the Anacostia, but that doesn't mean that's the only locale. In residents of Ward 3, 4, probably go down to Rock Creek Park quite a bit, and we see a lot of that bottle trash in Rock Creek. And as a matter of fact, the Rock Creek Conservancy does regular cleanups to haul that out of the creek. And maybe some of you on this call have actually volunteered with them. So the problem, even though it's worse in the Anacostia, the problem definitely is right here at home with all of us.
So just a quick follow-up, and that is, if I'm going to Safeway and I'm buying one of the packages of, say, 24 8-ounce bottles, plastic bottles of water, I pay, I'm assuming, 10 cents for each of those bottles. So it would be $2.40 on top of the cost of the water itself. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And
Very
I
good.
just,
But
Yeah.
you're going to get that back when you return the empty
No, I understand.
containers.
Yeah.
So
No, right.
It's not like the bag fee where you pay 5 cents if you take plastic bags at the Safeway, which I see plenty of people doing. And I always bring my reusable bags, but other people seem to forget them, and they pay that 5 cents and they never get it back. So that's a fee or a tax. This is a deposit. And as soon as you return it to one of those reverse vending machines, it's going to spit out a little credit slip, and you can bring that into the Safeway. And either it's your choice, you can ask for the cash back and they have to give you the cash back, or you can credit it towards your next purchase. So if you every week are buying 24 plastic bottles of water, which I wouldn't advise you to do, for the microplastics and PFAS contamination.
Right,
If
right,
that's what you
right.
decide to do, then you're going to get your 240 back, and then you can use that for the next week's purchase. So
Okay.
you really have a hit maybe the first time.
Got it. Very good. Thank you for that. So in terms of order of questions, I want to go to Carol Grunwald, then Lisa, and then my wife Jane is asking a question, and Brian Heilman he put a question in the chat, and then we already had 2 questions in the chat. So in that particular, we got a lot of questions teed up here. So Carol, go ahead. You're on mute, Carol. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm a new commissioner here. Thank you so much for this presentation. It is very interesting. This is fabulous work. I just have a few questions for you. How did you decide on 10 cents? Why is that the sweet spot? If you raised it to 15 cents a bottle, would that raise the return rate? Then I also have another question. Is there a way to incentivize the use of glass bottles? And are the collected plastic bottles really being recycled? And are there any downsides to the bill that we haven't heard about? Thank you.
Did you get all those, Stephanie?
Can you say the one about the third one, or plastic?
Yeah.
What did you ask about plastic?
Yeah. So are the collected bottles really being recycled, the plastic bottles? Is it possible to incentivize the use of glass bottles? Are there any downsides to the bill? And how did you get to the 10%, 10 cent a bottle, deposit, as opposed to, let's say, 15 cents or 20 cents? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start off, and then as I did before, I want to give Chris and Susan a chance to chime in. So 5 cents, what we see in terms of the data is that you have worse figures in terms of reduction in litter. The highest figures are at the 10-cent rate. I don't know enough, and I'm going to let Chris or Susan jump in about whether 15 cents was ever considered. Do you want to jump in on that now?
Yeah, this is Chris. I do not know that 15 cents has ever been considered. I've never heard that. But in looking at all the data, which Container Recycling Institute and others do, look at the states that are doing that. What they found is 5 cents, it just is not enough incentive for people to return their container. They're busy, they got a lot to do, they're just gonna throw it in recycling or elsewhere. 10 cents though, the incentive really goes up, and there are certain states like Massachusetts currently has 5 cents. That's how their original law was written. And they're actually going back to the drawing board to get that raised to 10 cents. So it's just showing, after all the research, that is that sweet spot. Not to say it might not go up to 15 cents in the future.
So, yeah, if I could just add to that. Yeah, you're right. I'm not aware of any of these 10 bottle bill states that have a 15-cent deposit.
Or higher, right?
Or higher. So if you remember the numbers that very large print slide that Stephanie put up that showed the litter reduction rate between 69 and 84%, that was a government study of different bottle bill states. And it found you reached the 84% reduction in litter when you had a 10-cent deposit. So the lower numbers of litter reduction are associated with the 5-cent deposit. And as Chris said, those are decades old. Those bills in, like in the New England states were passed decades ago, and they're trying to modernize them and bring them to a 10-cent deposit, but they're facing stiff resistance from the beverage
Right.
companies.
I was just thinking, you know, if you raised it to 15 cents a bottle, you might get even more returns, or 20 cents a bottle, you might even get more returns. But I guess it's too radical. You probably best to start at 10 cents, right?
Exactly. And there
Right.
are provisions. We're trying to learn from the other bottle bill states where they mandated the amount of the deposit in the law, which requires them to amend the law in order to increase the deposit. So this bill, as it's currently written, has some triggers where the deposits could go up. So it includes performance targets that the beverage companies have to meet. So like the first year that it's in effect, they have to reach a 75-cent redemption rate, which is the rate of return of bottles to stores. And if they don't meet the redemption rates that are included in the performance targets over a 5-year period for 2 consecutive years, then the deposit amount can be increased. So we can increase it, but we don't want to start with a huge deposit. But there are mechanisms. If it's not working, it can be increased.
Let me try to really quickly touch on the other 2 questions that you asked, and I see there's a whole bunch of other questions as well. Your last one, are plastic bottles really being recycled? The answer is yes, if they're clean and ending up in the recycle bill. We know that number 1 and number 2, those, you know, with the triangle 1 and 2, do get recycled. But the problem is most of them are not, and in the city are not ending up in the form they need to be, which is clean and in the recycle bin. So this is we think, a huge potential solution to that problem. Incentivizing glass and other materials. Oh my goodness, this is right up my alley. I couldn't agree more. I would like to see less plastic, more glass, more aluminum. I think this is a step toward that, or what we say is this could be a really important step toward helping with the reusables. You know, reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle's at the bottom for a reason. If we could get more reuse, and there'll be more incentives by the beverage companies, for the beverage companies to want to reuse because of the costs that they will have to bear, hopefully we can start to see a move toward reusables. And it's much easier to reuse glass than it is to reuse plastic. So that would be the directionality. I think this, I personally believe, and I think I'm speaking for the coalition as well, this is a step in that right direction.
Did that get to all of Carol's questions? Carol, did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, great. Lisa.
So I had a question on, and I think you kind of touched on it when you talked about redemption rates. I understand that Ward 7 and 8. So I'm thinking about the wards that are traditionally not as advantaged, and wondering how wards like 7 and 8 that probably have more of the small mom and pop shops, and we know Ward 8 in particular is a grocery desert. They don't have nowhere near as many grocery retailers as other wards. What do you think the impact on those wards will be on that side of the social justice spectrum? Are small mom and pop retailers exempt from this bill? Would there be more and different types of recycling repositories for those wards? I'm curious to know what the discussion is about that.
So yes, really small mom and pop, as you say, less than 2,000 square feet stores will be exempt, which leads to your first question. Is there going to be enough concentration of places where beverages can be redeemed in some of those less advantaged areas? And I think that's a major point that is addressed in the current language of the bottle bill, where I was just pulling up this language today. I think this is on the Nadeau, Councilmember Nadeau's site. DOEE is authorized to set a minimum number of return locations in underserved areas. So that's exactly what the nonprofit that will be established to carry out the process overseen by Department of Energy and Environment will be looking for. I mean, they'll be looking for a series of things, what the redemption rates are, what the recycling rates are, and where are these setups so that people have easy access. Because again, that was one of the major concerns that we saw when we were talking to what we heard when we were talking to residents. They need to, they don't want, we don't want, the council doesn't want, I think, for anyone to have to travel long distances to get their money back.
Right. Okay, great. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Jane, you're on mute, honey. You're on mute. Just go ahead and figure out how to unmute yourself. I'll go to Mary and we'll come back. Mary, go ahead, and you're on mute as well, Mary. There you go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, Lisa, thank you so much for your question. And I have another side of that. I'm really asking for what research has been done on this. Massachusetts instituted a policy like this in the 70s, and I've lived with that for years. And it's still 5 cents, and maybe they're stuck with that. But has there been any research done as to whether a 10-cent, a higher than 5-cent deposit requirement affects lower income populations in terms of what they feel they can buy? And if I'm allowed a two-parter, my little brother actually established with a whole bunch of his friends in Massachusetts a scholarship fund for low-income students. They'd go through the communities, pick up these bottles, and bring them to repositories, get the money back. So how diverse are the resources for getting bottles back and getting the money for them going to be? I'm a little cautious about popping a bottle into a slot over and over and over again. I'm thinking about big trash bags full of bottles. That's it.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Mary, for that question. I think that is the big concern is I think that's how the 10 cents was arrived at, is trying to balance that, creating enough incentive for people to want to do the collection, but not making it prohibitive in terms of the upfront cost of buying the beverage. And that's, I think, where the 10 cent, the research from the 10 states shows that's the key. Well, it's key to balance it, and 10 cents today seems to be the right balancing point. This relates to your first and your second question. What we've seen in other states is the emergence of this group of canners, as they're called, that I saw this when I was in New York recently, New York City. I mean, it's lucrative enough that it can become an income stream for people who want to put the time into doing those collections. And there will be places for them. They don't have to use the reverse vending machines. There are other mechanisms to return larger volumes, these so-called bag drop areas, and then bulk centers for larger volumes. So I don't imagine these guys or gals who show up with the big bags are going to do this all in the reverse vending machines. I'm sure they would go to some of these other centers.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, can
Yeah.
I ask, is there going to be a function within the plan of more mass collection areas for the bottles? Because that's where you get a real economic impact. And you can even have a charitable impact. Certainly it's happened in Massachusetts.
And that's exactly what we would anticipate is going to happen here. But Susan, you were going to add something.
So one of our coalition members is a small waste hauler in Ward 8. And he leads as well a nonprofit organization. And he's already got 2 entrepreneurial ideas that he sees the potential for in Ward 7 and 8 that he wants to work on. One is the canners that Stephanie's been telling you about. He's seen how canners operate effectively in New York. And there's an organization there that looks out for the rights of the canners, and he wants to create, an organization that's not going to exploit people and help people to earn money from this program. But he also has an idea to have a mobile collection system. He's talking about, getting an old school bus and going around to schools and being able to have the children bring their bottles and cans back to school.
Okay.
And so what will that actually happen? I can't promise you, but what I could tell you is that the system is flexible enough that it is going to give rise to all sorts of entrepreneurial activities that we can't imagine right now because it's got this incentive attached to it, that it creates money-making opportunities. So, right now we have the law. It will then go to, as Stephanie said, a nonprofit organization, but that's a beverage container stewardship organization. That's the beverage companies. They have to get together. They have to develop a plan how they're going to reach the performance targets required in the bill. And they're not going to be able to reach those performance targets if they're not collecting the bottles and cans from people all across the district. So, there will be enforcement by DOEE, but it's the beverage companies will come up with a plan, and it should also be flexible enough that will allow entrepreneurs, like our coalition partner member, whose wheels are already spinning, thinking about how he's going to make this work.
Well, it also seems to me that there has to be, I'm still very concerned about the issue Bruce brought up. You've got a $2.40 impact on water bottles for folks who are drinking bottled water because they've got lead pipes. And I think the bill will be much stronger if there are convenient recycling and redistribution mechanisms built into it, so that folks know they're going to get their money back, and have an easy way of getting it back and not having to go out of their way.
That's what it will do, because it's the only way the beverage companies are going to be able to meet their performance targets. But in addition, as Stephanie mentioned, not everybody is going to bring all of their bottles back. So there's going to be a pool of unclaimed deposits, and that's going to go into a special fund. And one of the things that fund can be used is to buy effective water filters for low-income district residents whose lead service line has not yet been replaced. So that the goal would then be to help them get off the reliance on plastic water bottles, which bring their own dangers, and help them to have safe tap water, like many of us here in Ward 3 enjoy.
Okay, so the bill needs to connect all of these things.
It does.
Yeah. All right.
So let me jump in, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Just do a quick time check. We're at 7:26. Sort of want to keep this to the designated time as much as possible, but with the questions that we've got pending, we're probably going to run over. Our panelists, in effect, Stephanie and Susan and Chris, are you guys okay staying with us for a few minutes? I'm happy to stay as long as you want to talk, but I'm mindful of everybody's time. So Jane and then Liz and Brian put a question in, and John Burwell put a question in. I think Brian got his question answered in part, but Brian, you can come and speak to your question. And then Lisa, we've got the WhatsApp questions that we have to get to as well. So go ahead, Jane, and then Liz, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentations. The initiative is it's a great idea. I had a couple questions which got answered already, but I just want to speak briefly to my personal experience. For many summers, I spent the summer with our 3 kids in Rhode Island, less than a mile from the Connecticut border, and we were running a summer camp, a campground. And so I had the experience of in Connecticut, where they have a 10-cent bottle deposit, every grocery store has redemption machines, and people just get in the habit of, when they go shopping, they take their reusable bags and they take their bag of recyclables, and on the way in, they pop their bottles in the machines, get their slip, and it becomes very routine. And in terms of the prices, my part of my job was stocking the camp store. So I'd be buying in bulk boxes of soda, cases of water. And I found that I did not see any discernible difference in price. A lot of times, especially these products are, they have national sales that are determined by the companies. And I could go to the Stop and Shop in Rhode Island or the Stop and Shop in Connecticut, and I'd be paying the same price. They'd have the same sales. And yes, the ones in Connecticut have a 10-cent deposit. The ones in Rhode Island don't, and yet they did not reflect that difference. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. And also one other thing, it's kind of horrible to say this, but it does create an incentive. I think it helps train kids. I saw a lot of kids at the camp become a lot more conscious of what they did with their bottles after they finished drinking them. I certainly let my kids keep the deposit, for example, as an incentive to pick up bottles and pick up trash. And it's a great way to teach them a little more responsibility.
Great, thank you. Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a question born out of ignorance, so forgive me if this sounds silly, but the district's current recycling mode, which is you stick it in the blue bins, and what gets in, what doesn't get in goes to the landfill probably. Is that strictly economically outflow for the district, or does the district get any money back from that recycling plan? So when you look at the savings to the district, and this is not in any way to denigrate this program, I think it's great. I'm just curious about the economics of it. Like, does the district make any money from its current recycling activities, or is it strictly just money out the door?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, when the bottle bill is implemented, we're expecting that there will be considerably less recycling going into the curbside recycling. And that will save the district money, because all of that volume will not be going through the systems that the district is paying for now. Okay. And as Susan said, it's the beverage companies that will be paying for the way this new system that will account for so much volume and increased volume in beverage container returns coming into the system, that will be paid for by the beverage companies. I'm not sure I answered your question. But
yeah, you did. Because my question was really, is our current recycling program just costing the district money, or does it bring in any revenue? And I think the answer from what I heard you say is it just costs the district money. It doesn't bring in any revenue.
There is a system. So the district is actually going right now to a new recycling contract, and they're different. They have an RFP and they're going to be evaluating those. But the way it works is that we have to pay the contractor to haul the materials out to the sorting facility, and then there's a tipping fee that we pay. But then they then sell it to end markets for recycling, and the district kind of gets a credit for some of that. Okay. But glass happens to be one of the heaviest things, and they don't actually recycle the glass right now. It just gets ground up and is used as daily cover for landfills, which is really, really disappointing.
Yeah.
And so they charge us for that. So we might get some money for the value. What's valuable is the paper and cardboard. And so we do get some credit for that. We get some credit for the plastics that can be recycled and some for the aluminum. But then we have to pay for the glass, and we have to pay for all the contaminated materials that are in there that wind up going to a landfill. So it costs us billions of dollars every year for that recycling contract. As Stephanie said, we think 20% of the weight is going to come out of that and should save us money.
I have to say that what you just said really surprised me, because I've always thought that glass is the thing that gets recycled more than plastic. So it's very disappointing, actually, to learn that the glass just gets ground up. But thank you very much.
That was super disappointing.
Yeah, no, that
glass is infinitely recyclable. It could be recycled.
That's why it's so disappointing.
Yeah, and it's such a wonderful material in so many respects, except that it's heavy, which means that to get it to the places that would recycle it, the transportation costs are too high. So that's why there's no market for it here.
There's a climate cost to dragging glass across the planet also. Thank you so much for that. It was very helpful.
Great.
Thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Liz. John Burwell. John, you're on. If you want to activate your video and come on and ask your question, I can read it from the chat. But since you're on, you might just join us. And while you're doing that, Lisa, you had the WhatsApp questions. I think you put them in the chat, but I don't actually see them on my end. So whoever has those questions and wants to read them and then answer them, that would be great. And then John will come back to you.
Okay.
So I have the, oh, go ahead, Lisa, go ahead.
I think they actually may have been answered already.
Well, why don't we do this? Can we just read the questions to make sure that they've been answered? I just want to cover those for sure. Do you have the question, Stephanie?
Yes, I can read. Thank you, Lisa. As an anti-plastic supporter, I like this idea. I'm just curious why the deposit for glass, and I suppose metal, is the same as plastic. Our family makes conscious decisions about trying to purchase items in glass as opposed to plastic, which already tends to cost more than items sold in plastic. For the average consumer, I'm not sure how this would shift behavior away from plastic and toward glass and metal, as they might be more likely to just choose the cheapest option. Seems like it might be worth having a larger deposit on plastic as opposed to glass and metal, or only having the deposit be refundable on glass and metal items. Just my 2 cents. Yeah, that was her question. Oh, and then also, or his question. Also, I think the same person.
This was a different person.
Oh, different person. Okay. So I think we answered that earlier. I mean, actually, Susan, I don't know if there was ever a discussion about delineating between the materials, but I think it would probably be too complicated for the city to implement. It's already a completely new system that's going to be introduced through this bill. I'm also all in favor of incentivizing moves away from plastic toward glass and metal. And what I mentioned before, and I think maybe Susan and Chris did as well, is that what we're hoping is that this process, this bill and the actions that need to be taken to implement it will incentivize the beverage companies to look toward refill, again, reusable bottles as a solution to the additional, to counter the additional costs that they're going to have to bear through this mechanism, this new mechanism. And the second question was, we did answer this, I think, but someone else asked it. Oh no, this is a different one. I also hadn't realized it was meant to work this way, similar to old school milk bottle deposits. I'm similarly skeptical about the utility of making a green choice even more expensive up front, as someone who already tries to avoid plastic and finds these choices already more expensive up front. And then the other question from Mary, Oh, I think we covered that, right? How does it figure
Yeah.
10-cent versus 5-cent deposit is the
Yeah.
sweet spot?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we covered that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Let's go to John then. John Burwell. John, you're on mute.
Hello, all. Yes, thank you for this presentation. I saw something earlier in the week, and they described how the Redeemer would get 4 cents. Obviously, somebody's got to pay for the equipment and the machinery and maintenance of these things that collect the bottles. So they're getting 4 cents per container. Where does that money come from? How is that financed?
That is funded by the beverage companies. Susan or Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, through the mechanism that's created of this nonprofit that manages the new systems that will be in place for collection by the retailers and other outlets.
So
No,
the retailers will get paid, redemption centers will get paid a handling fee, and that's paid by the beverage companies, as Stephanie said, through this beverage container stewardship organization. And so one point that I wanted to make that I think hasn't been made yet is that's the real reason why beverage companies don't like bottle bills, because they are paying for the recycling. Okay, that's what they're paying for. They're paying for Safeway and Giant to install a reverse vending machine and then have a hauler move those materials to be recycled. And so the beverage companies, you should expect to hear a lot from them. And they're going to start scaring everybody about this program. They've already started it. We learned that last weekend they were distributing flyers in Petworth, trying to scare people that it's going to increase prices. We talked about that today. It doesn't increase prices. They present the deposit as a tax that you'll never get back again. You get the deposit back immediately. They claim to care about the little people, but really they're hiding behind the little people so that they don't have to pay that 4-cent handling fee to actually have their packaging choices sent for recycling.
Thank you. And yet I recall seeing commercials on TV where Coke and Dr. Pepper and it seemed like Pepsi and so forth, they were touting the fact of, we're making bottles that can be recycled, even the caps and so forth, kind of pro recycling.
Yes, but they haven't increased the recycling rates at all. And I think it's the CEO of Coke recently was talking about the tariffs that Trump wants to put on aluminum coming from Canada and other foreign countries as a reason why now Coke was going to have to use more plastic bottles because they weren't going to be able to afford the aluminum cans. But of course, if they backed a bottle bill, all of those aluminum cans, which will be included in the district bottle bill if it gets passed, those are infinitely recyclable. And you'd think they would be supporting a bottle bill at a time when aluminum costs might go up, where they could use more recycled materials, but instead they're using as an excuse to produce even more toxic and harmful plastic.
Great. John, thank you. Is that good, John? Your question? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So we are at 7:41. I want to leave open any final questions that anyone has. While you're thinking about a final question, if Susan, Stephanie, or Chris, you could do a minute on the legislative path that the bottle bill needs to take, because it goes through committees and so forth and so on. There are 11 of 13 council member co-sponsors, but nonetheless, this has to work its way through the council. So can you kind of just describe that to us quickly and tell us when there might ultimately be a vote on this on the council? Susan, maybe
Yeah.
over.
I can go ahead and answer
Okay.
that. I think Stephanie alluded to it earlier, but So the bill has been introduced. It's been referred to 2 committees. First, it's been referred to the Business Committee. That's where it's sitting right now. That referral lasts until July 14th. And then on July 15th, it will go over to the Committee on Transportation and the Environment. We do know Councilmember Allen certainly is planning to hold hearings when that bill gets to his committee. Whether Councilmember McDuffie holds hearings in his committee is still unknown. But I put the 3RC website in the chat. If you would like to sign up to get our alerts, then we could keep you informed of the process, let you know when those hearings are going to be held. And I should say one thing. If there is not a hearing until it goes to the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, even though it goes there July 15th, they're going to be on summer break. So probably the soonest there would be a hearing in that committee would be September.
Okay.
That's right. And we did just testify in 2 hearings. You know, council is doing performance oversight hearings now in both the Department of Public Works and the Department of Energy and the Environment oversight hearings, calling for a joint hearing of the 2 committees as soon as possible, because the longer that we wait for this, the more misrepresentations the beverage companies will make about this bill. So if you wanted to support us, you could also, email or call your council members and say, we want a hearing on this and we want it as soon as possible. That's what we were testifying for last week.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So go ahead, Lisa.
Just one question. I know there's been a number of ANCs that have done resolutions on this, and I plan to work with Bruce to co-introduce one for 3G. Out of the different resolutions that are out there, which one do you think meets the mark? And given where we are now, one of the things like I hadn't considered, you are calling for a joint oversight hearing between the 2 committees. What things should we be looking at besides the obvious for our resolution?
Chris, you've
yeah,
probably
sure.
got
You were in the last committee meeting.
Right,
I mean,
right.
the last ANC.
Yeah, I was just looking it up. So sorry. The end of last week, ANC 4D04 passed a resolution, and it was really, I think, a really great model. We can send that to you and Bruce. Very sweet, to the point. They supported the bottle bill, and they called for hearings to be held as soon as possible. So we can send that to you.
Okay. They usually do very, very good resolutions.
Well, they did this time too. Yeah.
I secretly monitor their site.
There you go.
Well, great. So at 7:45, let me bring us to a close and thank, obviously, Stephanie for joining us, Susan and Chris. Thank you very much for coming on. This was very informative. I want to thank Lisa for co-hosting this with me, for Carol and Liz for joining from the commission, for community members for being part of this. And we are recording this, so this will be memorialized and available for anybody in the community to listen to, and we'll publicize its availability. Stephanie will be joining us at our meeting tomorrow night as well to go over the sort of the top line of all this. But this gave us an opportunity in this way to go into depth and detail and take a number of community questions. So I think we fulfilled our purpose here. So I want to thank you guys very much again. And we'll look forward, Stephanie, to having you with the full commission tomorrow night. Are we
Sounds
okay?
great. Thank you for the
Thank you,
opportunity
everyone.
to speak with you this evening.
Great. Well, thank you all again. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for hosting us. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.